Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling one of those headlines that just grabs you. Discovery of a huge underwater mountain in the Atlantic Ocean reignites the myth of Atlantis. Starts off with quite a hook, doesn't it?
It really does. And that spark, between real science and ancient legend, that's what makes this so interesting to talk about today.
Absolutely. So for everyone listening, this story really took off after Spanish researchers found this massive underwater structure near Lanzarote in the Canary Islands.
Right, a huge geological feature, and maybe predictably, the idea of the mythical Atlantis immediately came up for a lot of people.
Exactly. And to help us navigate this, we've got some material detailing the discovery itself, but also exploring the deeper history of the Atlantis myth. It's this great mix of science and ancient stories.
Sounds fascinating.
So our mission today is pretty clear. We're going to unpack this new geological find and see how it stacks up against Plato's tales of Atlantis. We'll look at it from, the believer's perspective and the skeptic's angle, too.
So listeners can get a really clear picture of why this legend persists, especially now with this new evidence.
Precisely. Giving everyone the context to understand the enduring appeal of this ancient myth.
Okay, perfect. So to kick things off, maybe we should dive straight into the geological discovery itself. What exactly did the scientists find down there in the depths?
Let's do it. So this seamount, they've actually named it Monte Los Atlantes, which is, well, pretty on the nose.
Huh, you could say that.
It was found by scientists from the Geological and Mining Institute of Spain, the IGME CSS. They were actually studying volcanic activity in the area.
So kind of an accidental discovery while looking for something else. Science works like that sometimes.
It really does. Imagine studying volcanoes and stumbling upon something that might link back to one of the world's biggest legends.
It's incredible. And this underwater mountain, where exactly is it located?
It's just off the coast of Lanzarote, one of the Canary Islands, and the size is pretty impressive. It's about 50 kilometers in diameter.
50 kilometers. That's substantial.
Yeah, and it actually hosts 3 dormant volcanoes on it, just sitting there quiet for now.
Wow. And how deep are we talking?
Well, its base sits in water that's between 100 and 2,500 meters deep. So it's a significant structure rising from the seabed.
Definitely a major feature.
And what really fanned the flames, so to speak, was a comment from one of the geologists on the team, Luis Somoza. He said, and I'm quoting here, "This could be the origin of the legend of Atlantis."
Okay, that's a bold statement from a scientist involved. What makes them draw that potential connection? What are the parallels?
Right. Well, that takes us straight to Plato's classic description of Atlantis. He wrote about this incredibly powerful civilization that was swallowed by the ocean in like a single day and night of catastrophe. And crucially, he placed it beyond the Pillars of Hercules.
Which we generally understand to mean the Strait of Gibraltar today.
Exactly. So geographically, where does Monte Los Atlantes fit into that picture?
Well, that's the interesting part. Its location off Lanzarote in the Atlantic. It aligns pretty well with that description of being beyond the Pillars of Hercules.
So the location matches up at least broadly. That's one key link.
Okay, I see. But how could an underwater mountain today have been a thriving civilization in the past, like the one Plato described?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? And the answer seems to lie in the geological history of Monte Los Atlantes itself. Apparently, the islands that make up this underwater structure, they were actually above sea level millions of years ago.
Oh, really? So they were volcanic islands, like the Canaries are now?
Precisely. Volcanic islands that existed way back then.
And what happened? What caused them to sink? Was it that sudden catastrophe Plato mentioned?
Well, probably not that sudden, geologically speaking. The scientists explain it as more of a gradual process. Over time, the volcanic activity slowed down.
Okay.
And the lava that had erupted solidified. This solidification actually increased the density of the islands, making them heavier.
Ah, I get it. So they became denser, heavier, and essentially sank slowly under their own weight, like a dense rock sinking in water.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They gradually subsided below the ocean's surface. And it's that idea of sinking beneath the waves that echoes Plato's story, even if the timescale is vastly different.
That is an interesting parallel. A gradual sinking rather than a single event.
Exactly. And it gets even more intriguing when you look at the top of this seamount. Even though it's underwater now, the researchers identified some really revealing features up there.
What sort of things did they find on the summit?
They found evidence of cliffs, sand dunes, even features that look like ancient beaches on the flatter parts of the summit.
Wow. So actual signs of a landscape that used to be dry land.
Yes, features that offer a glimpse into what it might have looked like when it was above the water.
That really paints a picture of a completely different environment in the past. When would this have been?
Well, the scientists estimate these islands could have been a viable habitat, for wildlife and such, way back during the Eocene epoch. That's roughly 56 to 34 million years ago.
Millions of years. Okay.
Yes, sea levels were much lower back then. It's a vast time scale, obviously.
A very different time scale from Plato's account, which suggested a much more recent disappearance, didn't it? Like 9,000 years before his time or something like that?
Definitely a huge discrepancy there. But that geologist Luis Somoza also brought up a really interesting point about the last ice age.
Oh, what was that?
He explained that during the last ice age, because so much water was locked up in glaciers, sea levels were significantly lower again, much lower than today.
Okay, right.
So during that period, these now submerged, inactive volcanoes could have actually reemerged as islands.
So relatively recently in Earth's history, geologically speaking, these could have been islands again. For a time.
Yes, exactly. And then, as the ice age ended and the glaciers melted, sea levels rose again.
Submerging them once more, hiding them until now.
Precisely. It's fascinating to think about these landscapes changing so dramatically over these vast periods, back and forth between land and sea.
Absolutely incredible.
Hmm.
So what's the next step in this investigation? What are the scientists planning to do to sort of firm up this potential Atlantis connection?
Well, the team is definitely eager to learn more. The main plan now is to analyze samples of volcanic rock they've collected from the seamount.
Okay, rock samples. What are they hoping to find out from those?
The primary goal is dating the rocks. They want to determine a more exact timeline for when these islands formed and when they sank.
So by dating the rocks, they could get a clearer picture of when these islands were actually above water, which might give a more concrete time frame to compare with the Atlantis story.
Exactly. That dating could provide crucial information about the region's geological past and, potentially strengthen or weaken the hypothesis that Monte Los Atlantes inspired the myth.
Makes sense.
And the exploration isn't stopping there. They're already planning new expeditions to investigate these underwater volcanoes in more detail.
Science pushing forward to unravel an ancient mystery. It's genuinely exciting. But maybe let's shift gears slightly from the geology and go back to the heart of the myth itself. Who was Plato, and what was the story he told that still fascinates us so much?
Good idea. So Plato, as many listeners will know, was one of the most influential philosophers of ancient Greece, writing back in the 4th century BCE.
Right.
And the main sources we have for the Atlantis legend come from two of his famous dialogues, Timaeus and Critias.
And what was the context for him telling this story of a lost civilization?
Well, in these dialogues, Socrates is discussing ideal societies and, importantly, the reasons why societies might decline or fall into ruin.
Okay, so it's part of a larger philosophical discussion.
Yes, and it's within that discussion that the story of Atlantis emerges. Plato describes Atlantis as this incredibly powerful naval empire that actually challenged and idealized ancient Athens, a real powerhouse of its time.
How did he describe the power and ambition of Atlantis in those dialogues?
He really paints a picture. He talks about a great and wonderful empire that ruled not just its own island, but other islands and even parts of the surrounding continents.
Wow.
He mentions them dominating parts of Libya and Europe up to Tyrrhenia, that's roughly modern Tuscany in Italy, and that this whole force united to try and subjugate Athens and other territories, basically an ancient superpower.
A major naval and military force then. But what was Plato's purpose in telling this story? Was he trying to record actual history, or was there something else going on?
That's the key question. And most scholars agree his intention probably wasn't historical accuracy. The Atlantis story he told is very likely an allegory.
An allegory, meaning?
Meaning he used it as a literary device, a kind of fictional example, to teach a moral lesson. He used Atlantis to illustrate the dangers of hubris, greed, and the unchecked pursuit of power, contrasting those vices with the virtues of justice and moderation, which he represented through his idealized Athens.
So the core idea was maybe to show how even a highly advanced civilization could fall due to its own moral failings.
Exactly. And it's worth noting that even Aristotle, who was Plato's own student, apparently confirmed that the story was intended as a kind of fable, a teaching tool, not a factual account.
Right. Despite that, though, as we saw at the start, the myth of Atlantis is clearly still alive and well. It captivates people today. Why do you think this story has such enduring appeal? What makes it resonate so strongly, even if it's likely fiction?
That really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Even knowing it's probably fiction, Atlantis just seems to capture the imagination like few other stories. I mean, think about all the films, TV shows, books, even video games based on it.
It's true. That text we were looking at mentioned something like 40 movies on IMDb with Atlantis in the title.
40. That's incredible. It's a cultural phenomenon.
So for those who do believe in a literal historical Atlantis, what do they generally claim about this lost civilization?
Well, the believers often picture Atlantis as a real island, inhabited by a highly advanced, perhaps even superior civilization, sort of a mother culture. They suggest the Atlanteans might have gifted humanity advanced knowledge in various fields, maybe even languages and religions. Some draw connections to everything from the Egyptian pyramids to Noah's flood, the invention of paper, laws, arts, sciences, even occult practices.
Wow, quite a list. A super advanced lost civilization that seeded knowledge around the world before disappearing.
That's the general idea for many enthusiasts. And interestingly, the chronological inconsistencies between these various ideas and established history don't seem to bother them too much.
The belief seems quite powerful. But what about the skeptic's perspective? How do they interpret this ongoing fascination?
The skeptics generally stick closer to the scholarly view, that Atlantis is a myth Plato created, a narrative tool, as we discussed, designed to illustrate the downfall that comes from societal decadence, contrasted with the benefits of justice and virtue, using Athens as the positive example.
A powerful allegory with a clear moral purpose. Makes
Yes.
sense.
It does. But let's bring it back to the science for a moment. How does geophysics, the study of the Earth's physical properties, weigh in on the possibility of a large lost continent like Atlantis existing in the Atlantic Ocean?
Well, geophysics, particularly the study of plate tectonics, presents a pretty significant challenge to the idea of a large continent just sinking in the middle of the Atlantic.
Plate tectonics. That's the theory explaining how the continents move around over vast timescales, right?
Exactly. It's shown how the continents we see today were once joined together in supercontinents like Pangaea and then drifted apart over millions of years.
Ah, yes, the classic example of how South America and Africa look like they could fit together like puzzle pieces.
Precisely. And when scientists reconstruct those ancient supercontinents based on geological evidence, well, there's just no room left over in the Atlantic Ocean for a large landmass the size Atlantis is often imagined to be.
So the geological history, the way the continents have moved, doesn't support a massive lost continent there.
Generally, no. The plate tectonic evidence is quite strong against it. But, as the text we're drawing from points out, this scientific evidence doesn't necessarily shake the conviction of true Atlantis enthusiasts.
Right. The hope for finding definitive proof remains.
For them, the lack of concrete archaeological evidence so far doesn't mean Atlantis never existed. They often hold out hope for future underwater discoveries, maybe finding ruins that could prove its existence, similar to how Troy was rediscovered. The search continues, in their minds.
Faith can move mountains or maybe explore oceans in this case. And even if science offers more rational explanations, art and culture keep drawing inspiration from this compelling myth.
Absolutely. The text mentions several artistic representations, like François de Nomé's painting The Fall of Atlantis, showing this huge wave crashing over a city.
Yeah, very dramatic. Very evocative imagery. It really taps into that sense of cataclysm.
And sculpture, too. There's Einar Jonsson's The King of Atlantis, this sort of enigmatic, mournful figure, and Ivan Mitrovich's Atlantis, depicting a walking woman with a look of suffering.
And that more modern one, Luc van Soom's The Man of Atlantis, the diver emerging from the water. It brings a contemporary angle, maybe hinting at rising sea levels and adaptation.
Possibly a commentary on climate change, yeah. And you even have conceptual art like Robert Smithson's Hypothetical Continent, map of transparent broken glass, Atlantis, reflecting an interest in landscapes that suggest prehistory, lost worlds.
It's amazing how this ancient story, likely a fable, continues to fuel creativity across centuries and mediums. Okay, so as we approach the end of our deep dive today, let's quickly recap the main takeaways.
Sounds good. We started with the discovery of Monte Los Atlantes, this huge underwater seamount near the Canaries. We discussed its geology, how it was likely once volcanic islands that gradually sank.
Right, and how its location and history have reignited the debate about whether it could be connected to Plato's Atlantis myth, even if the timelines are vastly different.
We explored Plato's description, recognized its probable allegorical purpose, but also acknowledged the myth's incredible staying power and popularity, despite scientific evidence challenging a literal lost continent.
It highlights this fascinating interplay between scientific discovery, ancient storytelling, and enduring human curiosity about lost worlds.
Definitely. And for everyone listening, perhaps think about which aspect of the Atlantis story resonates most with you. Is it the idea of a lost golden age, the advanced technology, the mystery of its disappearance, or maybe the moral lesson Plato intended? Why does it capture your imagination?
That's a great question to ponder. And maybe one final thought to leave you with. Regardless of whether Atlantis was historically real, what does its enduring story tell us about ourselves, about our anxieties regarding societal collapse, our fascination with the unknown, with lost knowledge?
And does this potential geological echo in Monte Los Atlantes, these islands that rose and fell, make Plato's allegorical warnings about hubris and decline feel even more relevant today?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.